President Trump's latest executive order aimed at reducing drug prices may look like a step forward on the surface, but beneath the headlines lies a deeply flawed, potentially dangerous set of policies that could end up raising drug prices, weakening Medicare's negotiating power, and undermining access to affordable medications for millions of Americans. While this move is being framed as a populist action to fight Big Pharma, in reality, it may offer more protection to drug companies than to the patients who rely on their products. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of the order is the administration's push to modify the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Program, a landmark reform passed under President Biden in 2022 that finally gave Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices on some of the most expensive and commonly used medications. That law was designed to break through decades of unchecked pharmaceutical lobbying and rein in out-of-control costs. But Trump's proposal would dilute this power by delaying the timeline under which drugs become eligible for price negotiations. While the administration has framed this as eliminating the pill penalty to spur innovation, what it really does is extend the period during which drug makers can charge sky-high monopoly prices at the expense of both taxpayers and patients. The current system allows small molecule drugs, like most pills, to face negotiation after 9 years, and biologics, more complex drugs, usually administered via injection or infusion, after 13 years. Drug companies have long complained that this disparity disincentivizes investment in cheaper drugs. But their solution, to simply give all drugs the longer, 13-year runway, would delay cost relief for many of the drugs that average Americans rely on most, such as blood pressure medications, cholesterol pills, or diabetes treatments. In effect, this change could add billions to Medicare's drug spending over time, all while handing pharmaceutical corporations a longer window to cash in on their patents. Even more contradictory is the Trump administration's attempt to pair these so-called cost-saving policies with a new round of tariffs on imported pharmaceuticals. The U.S. is heavily dependent on global drug manufacturing, particularly from Canada, India, and China, for a wide range of essential medicines, including generics and active pharmaceutical ingredients. Tariffs on these imports would almost certainly be passed along to buyers, including state Medicaid programs, hospitals, and ultimately patients. It's a move that seems entirely disconnected from the goal of reducing prices and could instead lead to widespread price hikes, tighter supply chains, and medication shortages, especially for older Americans and people with chronic conditions. Trump has revived another one of his older ideas, encouraging states to import cheaper drugs from Canada. While this policy sounds appealing in theory, it has always been more political theater than practical solution. Canada itself has repeatedly signaled that its own domestic supply cannot withstand bulk exports to the United States, and its health officials are unwilling to risk domestic shortages to subsidize America's broken pricing system. Even Florida, the only state granted FDA approval to launch a program under the Biden administration, has yet to actually begin importing any drugs. So while the executive order renews enthusiasm for this idea, it is unlikely to yield meaningful results, especially when combined with tariffs that would negate much of the cost advantage. The executive order does contain some policies that seem more directly aimed at lowering costs, such as requiring equal payment for drug administration across outpatient clinics and hospital-owned facilities. Currently, hospitals can charge Medicare significantly more for the same services offered at independent physician offices, a quirk in the reimbursement system that leads to inflated bills and higher copays for patients. Equalizing these payments could potentially reduce costs, but it also risks financially destabilizing smaller or rural hospitals that rely on higher reimbursements to stay open. Without strong safeguards, this site-neutral policy could further erode health care infrastructure in underserved areas, disproportionately impacting the people most in need of care. The order also directs the FDA to accelerate the approval process for generic and biosimilar drugs, another long-standing issue. These cheaper alternatives to brand-name drugs have struggled to gain traction in the U.S. despite promises of savings. Bureaucratic delays, patent manipulation by big pharmaceutical companies, and a lack of incentives for doctors and insurers to switch to generics have kept prices high and competition low. Accelerating approvals may help on the margins, but it is not a cure-all. especially without corresponding reforms to the system that allows drug makers to abuse the patent system to block competition. Trump also revived a 2020 executive order requiring community health clinics to offer insulin and epinephrine at heavily discounted prices to the uninsured and underinsured. While this may sound like a compassionate gesture, the clinics themselves have strongly opposed the mandate, citing significant administrative burdens and concerns about unfunded mandates. The Biden administration paused the rule for that very reason. Now, with the regulation reintroduced under Trump, these clinics may once again be faced with compliance requirements that divert already limited resources from broader patient care, making it harder, not easier, for vulnerable populations to access the treatments they need. Perhaps the most striking thing about the executive order is what isn't included. Notably missing is any reference to the most favored nation policy Trump once proposed, which would have pegged U.S. drug prices to the lower prices paid by other wealthy countries. That idea was struck down in federal court after aggressive legal challenges by the pharmaceutical industry. The fact that it's absent from this new package speaks volumes about the administration's unwillingness to confront Big Pharma directly. Instead, what we are left with is a patchwork of politically safe, industry-friendly measures wrapped in the language of populism. For all the talk of lowering prices, this order is more symbolic than substantive. It revives previously failed efforts, offers solutions that require congressional approval and are unlikely to pass, and introduces new policies that could actually increase costs or reduce access in the long run. In the context of a healthcare system already plagued by high prices, complex billing, and unequal access, what Americans need is bold, systemic reform, not a string of executive actions designed more for campaign talking points than real-world impact. If this is the Trump administration's flagship healthcare policy for 2025, it signals more turbulence ahead. The risk isn't just that the executive order fails to lower drug prices, it's that it could actively make things worse, all while sowing confusion, weakening Medicare, and pushing struggling health systems even closer to the brink. Americans should be skeptical of what's being sold to them as a cure, because at its core, this policy package may be little more than a placebo.